French-built small miniatures. Shipwrights, the definition, as you can see, is 1/32 inch to a foot, or a smaller scale. It's interesting, earlier this year, there was a comment in the log that 1/192 is quite a small scale for many of the members. But I'm going to be talking about something which is a scale of 1/1000 or smaller still. These are the four I've made over the years, all warships. The first one is Wolfhound, which is a V&W class destroyer of the Royal Navy in the UK. It was made about 1918, built about 1918, 1919, end of the First World War, and it's in the pre-war years, 20s and 30s, as you can see. It's 1/2400 scale, and it's 1.6 inch or 4 centimeters LOA. The next two are post-World War II frigates in the Royal Navy. The scales you can see, 1200, and their lengths, and they're in the 60s, 70s and 80s. The last one is HMS Salisbury. Now, this is at 1000 scale, 3 3/4 inches LOA or 93 millimeters, and it's 1942. The first one and the last one are contemporaries, and I'll explain why, because they're both built at the end of the First World War, but are shown in a later period of their lives. The first one was built about 14 years ago. Chichester was built in 2018, Plymouth in 2019, and Salisbury in 2022, last year. You'll see with the passage of time that the scale gets gradually a bit larger, and I'll leave that with you. This is the first one, Wolfhound, which is 2400 scale. I made this some while ago. It is a full hull model on pedestals, and it's meant to represent a large scale model that builders used to make to display their ships. Early in the last century in the UK, there's a huge shipbuilding industry, and many private builders are contracting with the government of the day to build ships for defence in the UK. It's in a glass case. The glass is from old microscope slides cut to size and put on a table, very much as you'd expect to see in a museum nowadays, if you can see one of these old models. They're beautifully made then. This is represented at a small scale. The features are, and I'll show you a couple more pictures in a moment, you have the rudders, propellers, A-brackets, prop shafts, bilge keels, and though it's not very clear, the hawse pipe for the anchor right at the bow is patent, and the anchor is made and it goes right up through to the deck. You can just about make out the simulated anchor chain on the foredeck there. The forward pedestal, well, both pedestals are 16 BA brass bolts cut to shape for the curved shape, and on the forward one there is a captive nut just in the bottom of the hull. The idea of this is to screw the bolt into place, into the nut, and adjust the height so the whole hull was level as you could possibly get it. It's a very fine-tuning device. That's just to prove the length for it. I put in a silhouette here because these are very good ways of showing up fine detail. You're not distracted by the colours or the contrasting wood and things of the hull and the mounting board. So you can see the rigging, all that is included. Everything is totally scratch built, as I would point out. I even managed to get the jack stay and the ensign staffs at the stern, which is a bit tricky, particularly with the jack staff at the bow, where you're trying to fit in a tripod support. This is a post-war frigate, about 1960, 1970, Royal Navy, F59, the pendant number. That's 3 3/8 inch LOA, and it shows you the various features. Twin Beauforts there, 2.2 barrels, 4.5 inch guns front. I think that may be US radar, I'm not sure on that one. Lattice mast, solid mast, This is diesel powered, so there's no such no funnel at all. You will kindly note the edge of the deck here, this other hull. It's quite fairly finely cut considering the scale. And when you blow something up from a tiny amount, not much longer than your forefinger, it does show up all sorts of slight things which you wouldn't want to show really, but are invisible to the naked eye in real life. This hull is carved from a wood, pear wood, and it gives a nice clean finish. I'm going to explain why I'm talking about that now, because the model I'm going to demonstrate, Salisbury, is from a different wood. I am laying a rule against some of the hulls later on, so you will see in real life these things. I've even got a little ladder there going up, which is wood treads. So you've got a bit of brown colour there on the leading up to the bridge from the forecastle deck. You can see just either side of the bridge there is vertical aerials. You can see that on this picture, just vertical. They're very thin, soft wire, and trying to get those to stay upright was quite a bit of fun. And I'll show you on the next model. Plymouth is another post-war frigate. It's a modified Type 12 frigate, again post-war, about 1970, 1980. This had a helicopter platform, and they have recognition on each of the Royal Navy ships has the recognition letters. This is PL for Plymouth, so anybody in a helicopter coming to land on the helo deck can know he's got the right ship to land on. You can see these vertical aerials that I mentioned a moment ago. It's more visible on this particular ship. Some are either side of the hangar, on the roof of the hangar, and also either side of the bridge. What I did in the end, because these things would not glue and stay upright, I simply put them in place on the tiniest blob of glue and totally inverted the ship model and rested at each end, so it's actually upside down, and gravity did the rest. This is HMS Salisbury, and you can see it's got a ship's badge down here, and you can see a Salisbury and the ship's badge. Most Royal Navy ships have these. This, as some of you will no doubt recognise, is an ex-USS ship, and it's one of the destroyers that President Roosevelt lent to Winston Churchill at the beginning of the war to help out with the U-boat menace right in 1940-41. They are 3 3/4 inches long at 1,000 scale. It's got enough detail in there, and I'll go into that in greater detail in a moment. It runs right through from the bull ring at the bow, right through to the very stern, where you've got the depth charge racks, and on top of those grey things are actually smoke floats. From the larger scale models, and I do make larger scales, the biggest scale I've worked at is 1/196, 1/8 inch equals a foot, and these are for working models. So I've done a lot of different scales, which has been an interesting experience over the years. There's a shorter build time. These take about 4 to 6 months to make, whereas a working model will often take me between 3 and 5 years to make because there's much more detail. As far as I know, there's no commercial parts of these scales that you can buy. I know there are frets of photo-etched brass material, which could be very useful, but I've never used them because everything I've done is made from scratch. And of course, the materials cost less, but the display case costs a lot more than the basic materials of the actual model itself. Normal tools on the right-hand side, etc., nothing different from larger scale models. The digital readout caliper is absolutely essential, and of course a calculator to reduce the scale from the plans or the photos you're working from. This is not a bit of ancient boat that's been dug out from 1,000 years ago and all rotten wood. This is a little thing I made, well thumbed as you can see, a bit of wood, but sticking out the end is a 0.12 stainless steel bit of wire. It's fixed into the little bit of wood underneath, a little whitish bit, because that's soft balsa wood, and otherwise it wouldn't go into harder wood, so the wire would simply bend. The point of that is you can apply very tiny blobs of adhesive or glue with that, which I use that a great deal. Very, very useful little homemade tool. This shows, basically to illustrate a background, you're working with very small parts of different shades and colours and lighting, so you do need a light background, and I'll show you later the rigging, the fine wire rigging. You wouldn't see it on the black, you can only see it on the white background, and the black is obviously for white or lighter painted pieces you're working against as a contrast. It seems a bit odd to you, but on the right hand side is the carpet, which is under my work table, and on the left is some vinyl flooring. My carpet underneath my work table has a peculiar effect. You've all come across or heard of a bouncy castle, even if you haven't been on one, but when I drop small items inadvertently on the floor, it hits the carpet. And unfortunately, when you look for it, it's not where you think you've dropped it. It jumped. I've known pieces would travel 20 inches from where they dropped when I've been hunting for them with a searchlight to find tiny little bits lost in the carpet tufting there. So just to be wary, make sure you've got a floor that doesn't bounce. Research. This is the Wolfhound. That's the first destroyer I showed you on the pedestals in the glass case. That's a drawing taken from a book on V&W destroyers called Scrap Heap Flotilla. These ships ended the First World War, which lasted through between the wars and were reused and used at the beginning of World War II. Now the point is, it's a nice line drawing. It is about 6 inches long in real life, but if you reduce that down to the size of the model, the 2400 scale, you lose most of the fine lines. So don't bother to go that small. Reduce it to about 400 or 600 scale. You've got enough line to be able to work from, and then you just work out the reduction factor to the size you're working on the model from the actual drawing. It's worth checking with some drawings, and I'll explain later on when describing Salisbury that not all drawings are totally accurate. So I always compare with the beam view of the ship in real life to make sure we've got all the various measurements correct. This is Chichester, the second ship I showed you. Beautiful beam on view there, and you can actually use this with your calipers on the photograph to check on the height of the freeboard, position of funnels or guns or any other features, and their height above the deck. Otherwise, if you're not accurate in these things at this scale, it's going to look ridiculous. This is Salisbury, the last one I showed you. It was built in 1919 in the USA, and it's a first for me because it's the first model of a US built ship I've ever made, and the second first for me is a four funneler. I haven't made a four funneler before now. Anyway, that's how it ends up, and I'll show you that at the end with its plaque on. This is the original ship, the USS Claxton, a Wilkes-class destroyer from 1919, shown here in the 1930s. A flush decker, and I did find a book on these ships, which is very useful in reference, but copyright, I can't perhaps show you the cover or anything about it. These apparently, Congress wouldn't give more money to the US Navy. These weren't awfully successful ships apparently, and as you can see, there's very little shear, a little bit of shear forward to the 140. They're a bit wet in heavy seas and the big oceans, and quite low, quite shallow towards the stern. The funnels they're separated, the first and second and the third and fourth are separated the same amount, but between 2 and 3 funnels is a wider gap, as you can see. Now I'm going to show you when it becomes HMS Salisbury, and this is a fairly good beam view, which I used a great deal on this. It's rather an old faded photograph. You can see there are some differences. The 4 funnel's been raised. The main mast is more pronounced, and it's got an HFDF high frequency direction finder on the top, which I'll show you later on the model. It's got a camouflage pattern as for the Royal Navy demands, a new pennant number I52, and on the top of the bridge there's an additional level there from the original US ship. Right, this is the initial hull at 93 millimeters, 3 3/4 inches LOA. This is in basswood. I did mention the pear wood for the Chichester and Plymouth models. This is in basswood. The reason for this is it's a softer wood. There are an awful lot of portholes on this ship on the side of the hull. I thought this would be easier to drill into. You can see the holes are made for the 4 funnels, and you can see it's not a very clear-cut hole. It's splintered a bit, and the wood did splinter. When I was drilling the holes for the portholes, this is a real problem. I had to keep adding filler inside, as well as lots of sanding sealer to try and get a smooth surface. So when you see so much closer photographs, it would appear to be some irregularities, slight imperfections really, which actually are not visible to the naked eye, but are visible on a big blow-up like this. At the stern, it's very narrow there, and there are these propeller guards, half-moon shaped things right at the stern there. There's also the holes drilled, pre-drilled for the mainmast and the foremast. So you have to get everything awfully accurate when you're building along. You can't really start altering these things as you move along. So that is why I use a photograph like this. Even a drawing may not be accurate, but if you've got a photograph of the real thing on a decent beam view like this, you can actually measure everything. And so you know exactly where things are going to be put, like the funnels, the bridge, the guns, the masts, etc., etc. You can't afford to make a mistake at this stage. Here's the hull in side view with the camouflage pattern in place. You can see the portholes drilled there. But it is a little rougher than I would like. There is the boot topping, the black line at the bottom of the hull just above the water. The British Admiralty normally stipulated that camouflage Western approaches schemes like this should have been down to the waterline, but many of the photographs of our ships of that time still show a little bit of boot topping, which is supposed to be secluded, but there it is. This is the bridge. The original bridge is in 3 levels, and one is glued upon the other, and you've got to make sure that nothing gets in the way for additions such as ladders, etc., like that. That gives an idea of the scale of those bits. We've moved on a bit now. We've got the bridge made and the first funnel, and the galley. Now this galley stretches right across the full beam of the ship, and I've included the stoves and the ovens, which is that thing with the large hole in. These are still visible because the aft end is going to be open, and so I've had included, as I say, things like cooking stoves and that. The forward end is a sheet which I think is enclosed, but photographs of different ships of this class do show some open and some closed, so there's a little bit of speculation in the construction of this. On the funnel, you see it's raked. They're all raked at the same angle, but their heights gradually lower towards the stern, with that little blip on the full funnel towards the top. That is a tiny bit of foil there, which is designed to hold the steam pipe, which will go in later, away from the funnel. So there's a slight gap between the steam pipe there. On the bridge, we've got ladders up to the first and next deck up, and there is a wooden flooring into the forward end of that bridge, the compass and a chart table and a locker on the port side, all included. You need to be aware that when you're making sides of these structures, the actual bulwarks on the sides have to be very, very thin, and usually come out of very thin aluminium, sheet aluminium, about 0.15 thickness. Otherwise, and I see this on plastic and resin kits, the sides of these things are far thick and out of scale, too much so. So I make this out of the thinnest possible metal material I can, and being soft aluminium, it's easily moldable to shape. The little copper thing at the forward end there is the mount for the forward gun. Moving on a bit now, we've got 4 funnels in, the galley's finished, and you've got the davits for the whaler on the starboard side, engine room skylights there, and you can see there is on the funnels, I talked about the steam pipe on the forward funnel in front there. The second funnel has nothing. The third funnel has a galley flue, which is in black and extends above the level of the funnel. And on the fourth funnel, there is on the aft side another steam pipe there. Got some added the forward 4-inch gun there, which I'll describe a little bit later. and the davits for the anchors, and there's an anchor cable there as well. The foremast is there with 2 yards, a little lookout tub, and the start of some rigging, the halyards. This is a pin vise with a 0.25 brass diameter brass rod. The masts and the gun barrels are all tapered. So what I've done is put the initial bit of wire in there, the right size, work out the size of the face of the mast or the gun barrel, and taper it. So you rest the wire on the worktop and file it down so it tapers to a slight thinness towards the end of the barrel or the top of the mast as appropriate. The guns are, if you take the 4-inch single gun on the front, you can work out you've got a 4-inch muzzle, and there's about 7 inches outside diameter. So you work out the end of the tapering of the brass rod, so you've got the right size there. And of course, towards the breech end, it gets wider. So you've got an accurate size of the actual barrel of the gun or the mast. This is a diagram, a drawing I did for the mainmast torn for stern, 0.23mm diameter at the top there, and just under 1.1 of a millimeter wire soldered on the end. It's the smallest soldering joint I've done. You have to get it dead on to be central like that, but I'll explain a little bit later and I'll show you why I've made the mainmast like that. Of course, there is a radar scanner on top of it. That's part of it. There's the thing again, and the sort of 3-sided wire cage each side. There's 4 of them, one facing us, one away from us, and the 2 at the side. The solder joint is soldered in lead solder, but the caging there is part of the HFDF scanner is glued on. Otherwise, if you try to solder it, of course, the original solder joint would melt away. So they're glued on in 4 aspects. Completed model, looking down on it. I haven't finished the C yet. It's got a few scratch marks, etc. on it. But repeating myself, you've got the 4 funnels, the galley and the deck over it, the aerials to the bar from the foremast backwards, 4-inch gun forward, anchor, cable, a few hatch covers, and the anchor. Now the stock on the anchor is at right angles to the flukes, so, and they're mounted in the US fashion with the flukes aft and the shank and the stock forward. 1 set of triple torpedo tubes fitted, and they were chamfered at the open end, as you would probably see later on. Can't see it in this view. On some of the original US ships, they had 4 lots of 3 or triple tubes, but these were removed and only 1 was kept on the version when it's handed over to the Royal Navy at the beginning of World War II, because it was mostly for anti-submarine, anti-U-boat, so there's a heavy depth charge weaponry, and you can see that on the stern there, and either side of the aft deck house where there's a 3-inch anti-aircraft gun, there are what we call depth charge throwers, but I think the US people call it a K-gun, to launch depth charges laterally each side to make a wide pattern over the suspected U-boat. After the whaler is 2 tubs, 1 port and 1 starboard. These are for the anti-aircraft Ehrlichen guns, and I'll mention those a little bit later on. This is the main mast. You can see just in forward of the aft 3-inch gun, and that's the radar HFDF ones I was mentioning earlier, and the small pole mast supporting it. This is the whaler. Now, I wasn't quite sure whether when it was handed over to the Royal Navy, whether the whaler was a US style or a Royal Navy British style. In the end, I opted for the US style, which is a powered thing with a propeller and a rudder and a engine cover in the middle, as you can see there, with thwarts. The Royal Navy whaler is a pulling boat, which is clinker built hull and is oared, so there's no power to it at all. I opted for the US version. I left it in the pale grey colour, which I think was the original US colour, and omitted to paint it in the camouflage pattern. So just to prove to myself it's still a US style whaler. The Carley floats are interesting. The previous speaker, the rectangular shaped floats he's on his warship models. The British ones are the oval shape with the inflatable bits, or the in an oval shape and a base to it. You can see I had several attempts trying to make the right shape and size, which wasn't easy because the pliers, they normally had a square beak and a round beak, the round ones weren't that round, so it's difficult to get the half circle at the end of each Carley float, as you can see, but eventually I got the right side and shape. That's the depth charge. 0.6 millimeter diameter brass wire and 0.9 millimeter length. I had to make several of these and get them all exactly right. So I had to cut them off the brass strip and then put them in a pin vise and file the end flat, so that it's a sort of like a piece of rod with a flat end each end. It's just under a millimeter. These are depth charges, pre-painting, mounted on the post-it. Now post-its, I don't know if it's the same name in the US or North America, but these little terrible things which you write notes on and stick them on something to remind yourself of something. The point is, it's got the glue level just about the third away top edge, and the glue or the adhesive is very, very just slightly tacky. So if you want to make it less tacky, you can just run your finger over it and then remove some of the tackiness, but it's enough to hold the very fine, light little things like these depth charges. And that's the useful way to mount them before spray painting them. This is the 3-inch aft gun, which is anti-aircraft. This is a drawing of it. You can see the tapering of the barrel and the thickness with the recoil mechanism there. It's quite complex, but you'll notice on the pedestal there's a concave aft aspect to this, and it's mounted on a round base plate. There are, on the overhead drawing, there are two platforms which seem to have holes in. These are shiny steel. I presume they're mounts for the gun layer and the gun trainer to sit on or stand on when operating the gun. Anyway, I managed to get those two items fitted onto the model one. There it is. That's the 3-inch aft gun on its pedestal, recoil and the barrel. And it's soldered such that it's at an angle of about 30 degrees, as you see on the photographs of the real ships. The shield there is out of very thin copper. It has a bend, and then obviously you fit that over the barrel and mount it such that the shield is at the proper angle. You can't see on there, but you may see on a later photo the two platforms I talked about just a moment ago on the drawing. They were included, but they're difficult to see actually. With the shield fitted on it, the height of the top of the shield down to the base is 2.5 millimeters. A little out of focus. These are the Oerlikon guns, 20 millimeter Oerlikon anti-aircraft guns, pedestal, and the shield, one on the right there, which is not fitted yet. The shield is set at a slight angle away from the top of the pedestal, so you had to put in a little spacing bit of metal just to keep the shield away from it, and then the barrels mounted at an angle above it. You probably see that on the finished model. This is just a pair of tweezers and showing you there's a little bit of copper sheet in there, and you see you're working on this. It's hardly showed beyond the end of the tip of the tweezers, so it's very difficult to maintain it in a fine tweezer and then file or sand it away to shape. But that's the sort of scale you're working at for some of these items. This is the rigging wire. Now it comes in bunches or strands like you see on the left, and then you take one out and straighten it. And you all are aware, I'm sure, of rolling it under a ruler or something like this to get it flat and straight. And it's on a white background, as you see. 0.05 millimeters is the width of a hair I took from my head, just to show you. 0.04 is the width of the wire. And the finest wire I've used on some rigging in the previous model is 0.015. It is a bit difficult to see nowadays. The brush is normal painting brush, and what I do to transfer the length of the wire to the ship, whether it be the halyards or rigging or whatever, you dampen the brush, pick it up, pick the straightened wire up, and then place it in position. There's a little bit of glue at one end placed on the, say, the yard arm, and then you add the wire to that, and gravity drops the other end into the position where you want it to be. Reasonable view, stern view, overhead view of the model. So see all the items I've talked about. There's a whaler on the right, the davits on the port side. There's no boat in any of the photographs I've seen, so I've left that out. I'm not sure what boat it might have been. You can see the tubs for the two Oerlikons either side of the, just after the whalers. These are peculiar things. The legs are sort of tapering and funny shape, and the tubs are on top. And again, the side of these are made from very fine, thin aluminium round a square bit of wood. They're not actually square purely, because the corners are actually at an angle at 45 degrees. So wrapping around a bit of square wood just about reproduced that. The triple torpedo tube, single version, there's a torpedo davit on the starboard side there. The aft deck house with the 3-inch anti-aircraft gun. And those white things with the slight curve at the top are the davits for reloading depth charges onto the throwers. And right at the aft are the grey smoke floats. I painted in a different colour to distinguish them from the black of the depth charges. They're mounted vertically over the depth charges. I'll show you the port side, which you haven't seen much before. There's the port side of the ship, and it gives an idea. You can see the bull ring right at the bow, the stowed anchor with the flukes and the right angles. The gun is accurate. The shield, there's a shield on this, or housing, and you can see the little black mark side the side. That's the sighting ports for the gun layer and the gun, the operation crew to see through when they are aiming the gun. It's wide at the aft end and the forward end, and it's made from a bit of copper sheet, like I showed you for the 3-inch gun, curved over the roof, and the sides added a bit later on. The windows, if you like to call them that, on the bridge, the original bridge, I laid some masking tape top and bottom around a bit of black felt tip pen along there, and then removed the masking tape, and then with a very fine little chisel just stroked through the black to make the window panes, the frames of the windows, to give a square appearance there. Shows the rigging, the stays for the foremast there, and the halyards and the aerials to the aft mounting now. The carney floats are on the side of the tubs. You can see the Oerlikon guns there, black barrel with the white shield and the pedestal, as you would see them. Various boxes around, which seem to be more on the port side and on the starboard side. The roof of the galley extends forward above, in front of the actual wall of the galley, and it had to be supported by little struts, vertical struts set in white either side to support the forward cover. There we are, finished model. It looks a bit rough on the side, as I explained the problems of filler that didn't quite work out, but it is shown up. It's not visible to the naked eye at all when you look at the model, and it gives a good idea of the layout of the thing. There's a very nice cloudy background to it, which is purely fortuitous. That wasn't meant to be, because it's not actually made to look as though it's in a sea. It's obviously mounted in a sea, but you've got the wood surround to the actual model, display model. There we are. There's the model with the ship's badge, a glass case in mahogany with contrasting maple, light maple wood around the model itself, and then the plaque in brass. So that is completed model. Thank you very much.